A mother's desperate decision to pawn her wedding ring sets off a chain of events that unearths buried secrets, reignites old wounds, and brings a dangerous enemy to her doorstep. Emily Carter has spent years protecting her children from a shadowy figure from her past. But when her ex-husband Ethan Calloway unexpectedly returns, offering help, the fragile walls she's built begin to crumble. As their family becomes the target of a relentless criminal, Emily and Ethan must confront their shared history and decide if they can trust one another to survive what's coming. Get ready for a gripping tale of suspense, resilience, and redemption. And don't miss out, make sure you hit that subscribe button. By the way, before we go any further, tell us, where are you watching from? The rain poured steadily as Emily Carter hurried down the dimly lit streets of Charleston, clutching a small velvet pouch in her trembling hands. The gold band inside felt heavier than it should, a symbol of a life she had once believed in and walked away from. Her old wedding ring, now just a means to feed her 2 children, was her last remaining connection to her ex-husband, Ethan Calloway. Inside the musty pawnshop, Arthur Green peered up from his ledger. His sharp eyes softened when he saw Emily. This wasn't her first visit. Without a word, she slid the pouch across the counter, her fingers lingering for a moment before letting go. "Are you sure about this, Emily?" Arthur asked, his voice gruff but kind. "I don't have a choice," she replied, her tone clipped. Arthur examined the ring, his expression unreadable. "This is a nice piece. I'll give you enough for a week's groceries. Not a penny more." Emily nodded stiffly, ignoring the sting of his words. She pocketed the cash and left, the shop's bell jingling behind her. Arthur's gaze lingered on the ring. He reached for an envelope, addressing it to an old contact, Marcus Lane, a jeweler in New York City. His instincts told him this piece carried more than monetary value. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his Manhattan office, reviewing contracts, when a package arrived. He opened it absent-mindedly, but the sight of the ring jolted him to his core. Memories of Emily flooded back, her laughter, her stubbornness, the family he had taken for granted. "What is this doing here?" Ethan murmured, his voice barely audible. "Something wrong, Mr. Calloway?" Clara, his assistant, asked. Ethan shook his head. "No, it's personal." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The ring symbolized everything he had lost. But why had it resurfaced now? The next morning, he booked a flight to Charleston. Ethan Calloway stepped out of the cab onto the damp streets of Charleston. The air was thick with the scent of rain and old cobblestones, a sharp contrast to the sterile glass towers of Manhattan. He adjusted his coat, scanning the rows of worn buildings until his eyes landed on the pawnshop. Arthur Green looked up as the bell above the door jingled. Ethan entered, his tall frame and tailored coat a jarring mismatch to the shop's cluttered shelves of forgotten belongings. "Morning," Arthur said evenly, already sizing him up. Ethan walked to the counter, pulling the velvet pouch from his pocket. "This ring," he began, placing it on the glass. "It came from here. I need to know who sold it." Arthur's face remained unreadable, but his hand stilled on the ledger he was writing in. "And why would you need to know that?" "It's personal," Ethan said, his tone firm. "The woman who sold it is my ex-wife. Her name is Emily Carter." Arthur's gaze hardened slightly, though he remained calm. "I don't usually give out information about my customers." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I'm not here to make trouble. I just need to know if she's okay, if she's safe." The sincerity in Ethan's voice gave Arthur pause. He leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. "Safe, huh?" he said. "You sure that's all you're worried about?" "What are you getting at?" Ethan asked, narrowing his eyes. Arthur tapped the counter lightly, his expression shifting. "Emily's had a hard time, Mr. Calloway. She didn't tell me much, but I could see it. You showing up here, you better not make things harder for her." Ethan's stomach twisted at Arthur's words. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice softer now. Arthur hesitated, then nodded toward the street. "There's a shelter a few blocks over. She volunteers there. It's where she's been getting by. Ethan thanked Arthur and left, his mind spinning. He had expected Emily to struggle after their separation, but hearing the word shelter hit harder than he anticipated. When Ethan arrived at the shelter, he hesitated at the door. The sound of children laughing and faint conversations drifted out. He pushed the door open, stepping inside to a room filled with warmth and activity. Then he saw her. Emily stood near the window, sorting supplies with another volunteer. Her dark hair was tied back, her face lined with exhaustion he hadn't remembered. For a moment, Ethan was struck by how out of place he felt, as though this world she had built for herself was one he could never fully understand. "Emily," he said, his voice cutting through the hum of the room. She turned, freezing when she saw him. Her expression hardened immediately, her guard snapping into place. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, stepping away from the supplies. Ethan held up his hands, his tone pleading. "I got the ring. It brought me here." Emily's eyes flickered with anger and disbelief. "You came all this way because of a ring? You've got to be kidding me." "I just want to talk," Ethan said, taking a cautious step closer. Emily shook her head. "You don't get to just walk back into my life, Ethan. Not after everything." "I know I don't deserve it," Ethan admitted. "But I need to know what's going on. Are you safe? Are the kids okay?" Emily hesitated, the tension between them thick. "We've been fine without you," she said coldly. "We don't need your help." Before Ethan could respond, another voice interrupted. "Everything okay here?" Rachel, the shelter's manager, appeared, her sharp eyes darting between them. Emily nodded quickly. "It's fine," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Rachel didn't look convinced, but stepped back to give them space. "I won't leave until we talk," Ethan said quietly. Emily crossed her arms, her voice like steel. "Fine. After my shift. But don't think for a second that this changed anything." As she turned back to her work, Ethan stood there for a moment, watching her. The woman he saw was stronger, fiercer, and more distant than he remembered. But beneath that strength, he caught a glimpse of the pain she was trying so hard to hide. Ethan paced outside the shelter as the sun dipped below the Charleston skyline. The quiet murmur of the city was a stark contrast to the turmoil inside him. Emily had agreed to talk, but her icy demeanor told him this wouldn't be a reunion, it would be a reckoning. When the shelter door finally opened, Emily stepped out, pulling her coat tighter against the evening chill. Her sharp eyes met his, filled with caution. "Talk," she said, crossing her arms. Ethan took a deep breath. "I didn't come here to disrupt your life, Emily. When I got the ring, I couldn't stop thinking about you. About everything I did wrong." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "It took a piece of jewelry to make you care? Figures." "I've always cared," Ethan shot back, his voice heavy with frustration. "I just didn't know how to fix it back then." "Fix it?" Emily's voice rose, anger breaking through her calm exterior. "You can't fix walking away, Ethan. You left me to handle everything alone." "I didn't know things were this bad," Ethan said quietly, his gaze dropping to the cracked pavement. "Exactly," Emily snapped. "Because you didn't want to know." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up nearby. Emily stiffened immediately, her head snapping toward the street. A dark sedan idled at the curb, its tinted windows giving away nothing of its occupants. "Emily, what is it?" Ethan asked, noting the sudden tension in her posture. She grabbed his arm and pulled him into the alley next to the shelter. "Stay out of sight," she whispered sharply. "Emily, just do it," she hissed, her eyes darting back to the car. Ethan reluctantly followed her lead, crouching behind a dumpster. He watched as a tall man in a dark coat stepped out of the sedan, his movements deliberate. He scanned the street before heading toward the shelter door. "Who is that?" Ethan asked in a low voice, his concern growing. Emily didn't answer right away. Her jaw tightened, and her breathing quickened. "His name is Vincent," she finally said, her voice barely audible. He's someone I used to know, someone dangerous. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together what little he knew. Is he the reason you left? Emily nodded, her eyes fixed on Vincent as he entered the shelter. He's been looking for me for years. I thought I'd shaken him. But Ethan's hands curled into fists. Does he know about the kids? No, Emily said quickly, turning to face him. And he can't. That's why I've stayed off the radar. No permanent address, no paper trail. The weight of her words hit Ethan like a freight train. This wasn't just about their failed marriage or financial struggles. Emily had been protecting their family from something far darker. What does he want from you? Ethan asked. Emily shook her head, her expression grim. Money, revenge, control. It doesn't matter. I just need him gone. Before Ethan could respond, Vincent reappeared, stepping back into the street. He lingered near his car, lighting a cigarette, his eyes scanning the area. We need to leave, Emily whispered, tugging on Ethan's sleeve. He nodded, following her as they slipped through the narrow alleyway. The two moved quickly, the tension between them momentarily set aside in the face of this new threat. Later, in the safety of Emily's small apartment, she locked the door behind them and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. This is why I didn't want you involved, she said, her voice trembling. I can't afford any risks. Not for me, and definitely not for Felix and Sophie. Ethan's eyes softened at the mention of their children. Emily, you don't have to do this alone anymore. Let me help. Emily hesitated, her defenses wavering. She had spent years building walls around her heart, around her life, but tonight's encounter had shaken her. I don't know if I can trust you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped closer, his tone steady. Then don't trust me yet. Trust that I'll protect them. Trust that I'm not going anywhere this time. For the first time, Emily's gaze softened, though the fear in her eyes remained. If you're staying, Ethan, you need to understand something, she said. This isn't just about me. If Vincent finds out about the kids, I don't know what he'll do. Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening with resolve. Then we'll make sure he doesn't. The morning sun streamed weakly through Emily's apartment windows, casting long shadows on the walls. She hadn't slept. Every sound from the street below felt like Vincent's footsteps creeping closer. Across the room, Ethan sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone with a furrowed brow. You look terrible, he said, glancing at Emily as she sipped her coffee. You're not exactly glowing either, she shot back, her voice sharp despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Ethan ignored the jab, his focus returning to his phone. I've been digging into Vincent, he said, breaking the tense silence. There's nothing obvious, but he's tied to some shady businesses. Extortion, money laundering, the works. If he's looking for you, it's not just personal, it's leverage. Emily set her coffee down with a clatter. I already know he's dangerous, Ethan. What I don't know is why you're still here. Because I'm not leaving, Ethan replied firmly. And because if he's as connected as it seems, you can't handle this alone. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. She hated the way Ethan's words resonated, the truth of her situation feeling heavier with each passing moment. Fine, she said after a pause. But if you're staying, you follow my rules. Deal? Ethan agreed without hesitation. Emily's phone buzzed, breaking their tenuous truce. She picked it up, her expression hardening as she read the message. It's from Rachel, she said. Vincent showed up at the shelter again this morning, asking questions. She's scared, Ethan. Then we need to figure out what he's after, Ethan said, standing and grabbing his coat. You said he wants control. Over what? Emily hesitated. It's not just about me, she admitted. Years ago, when we first got married, I borrowed money from him. A lot of money. I didn't tell you because I thought I could pay it back before you found out. But then he started asking for more, using threats to keep me under his thumb. Ethan froze. That's why you left? Emily nodded, her voice trembling. I had to protect the kids. Protect you. If he found out where we were, he'd never stop coming after us. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of her confession settling over him. "We're going to fix this," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever it takes." The plan began to take shape that afternoon. Ethan and Emily would use the pawnshop as a starting point, tracking Vincent's movements and connections. Arthur might know more than he had let on. When they arrived at the shop, Arthur's wary eyes narrowed. "You again," he muttered. "And you brought her this time." "We need your help," Ethan said, cutting straight to the point. Arthur crossed his arms. "Help with what?" "Vincent," Emily said, stepping forward. "You know him, don't you?" Arthur hesitated, his gaze flickering between them. "I know of him," he admitted. "He's bad news, Emily. If he's after you, you've got a storm coming your way." "We're trying to stop that storm," Ethan said. "Anything you can tell us would help." Arthur sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "Vincent operates out of a club on the east side," he said reluctantly. "It's where he handles his business." "But you didn't hear that from me." Ethan nodded, but Emily's expression tightened. "Why are you helping us now?" she asked. Arthur met her gaze evenly. "Because I've seen too many people lose to men like him. If there's even a chance you can get out from under him, I'll take that chance." That evening, Ethan and Emily parked across from the club Arthur had mentioned. The neon sign flickered in the darkness, casting eerie red light onto the street. "You're staying in the car," Ethan said firmly. Emily bristled. "I can't handle myself." "Maybe," Ethan replied, his tone softening. "But if Vincent sees you, it'll blow everything. Let me do this." Reluctantly, Emily nodded. "Be careful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped out of the car, his shoulders tense as he approached the club. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and loud music. He scanned the crowd, his eyes landing on Vincent in the corner, surrounded by men who looked just as dangerous as he did. Ethan's pulse quickened. This was the man who had chased Emily into the shadows, who had haunted her every step. Now, he was face to face with the enemy. He straightened his jacket and walked toward Vincent, his every step calculated. "Vincent," he said, his voice steady. "We need to talk." Vincent looked up, his eyes narrowing as a cold smile spread across his face. Well, he drawled. "Looks like I just found my leverage." Vincent leaned back in his chair, the smirk on his face sending a chill through Ethan. The club's dim lighting reflected off Vincent's cold eyes as he gestured for Ethan to sit. "I don't know who you are," Vincent said, his voice low and smooth, "but walking in here like this? That's either brave or stupid." "I'm Ethan Calloway," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his stomach. "You've been harassing my ex-wife Emily. It stops now." Vincent chuckled, a slow, menacing sound. "Emily," he repeated, as if savoring the name. "She still thinks she can run from me, huh? Cute." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Whatever she owes you, I'll pay it. Just leave her and the kids alone." Vincent raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "So you're the knight in shining armor now? Where were you when she came begging for money in the first place?" Ethan felt the jab land, but didn't let it show. "I'm here now," he said firmly. "Name your price." Vincent's smirk faded, replaced by something colder. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's not just about the money, Mr. Calloway. Emily crossed a line when she ran. She owes me more than cash, she owes me control. And if you think you can waltz in here and fix this with a check, you're naiver than I thought." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What do you want then?" Vincent's eyes gleamed with malice. "I want Emily to come to me, alone. No hiding, no running. That's the only way this ends." Ethan shook his head. "That's not happening." "Then you're wasting my time," Vincent said, standing. He motioned to one of his men, who stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Ethan stayed seated, his mind racing. "Wait," he said, holding up a hand. "If you hurt me, you'll never find her. You want her to come out of hiding? I can make that happen. But not like this." Vincent paused, studying him. You think you can negotiate with me? I think you want results, Ethan countered. And scaring her into a corner won't get them. Give me a few days, and I'll bring you a deal that works for both of us. Vincent's expression hardened, but after a tense silence, he nodded. 3 days, he said. After that, I'll find her myself, and you won't. Like what happens when I do. Ethan rose from the chair, every muscle in his body taut. 3 days, he repeated. No more. Vincent smirked again, waving him off. Better not waste them. Outside the club, Emily waited anxiously in the car. When she saw Ethan walking back, her heart sank at the grim expression on his face. What happened? She asked as he climbed into the passenger seat. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He gave us 3 days to figure this out. After that, he's coming after you himself. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Why would you make a deal with him? You can't trust Vincent. I know that, Ethan said, his voice sharp. But it buys us time. We need to come up with a plan, something that ends this for good. Emily stared at him, her emotions warring between anger and fear. And what happens if we fail? If he comes for the kids? We won't fail, Ethan said, his tone softening. I won't let him hurt you or them. Not again. Back at the apartment, the tension was palpable as they tried to devise a strategy. Ethan called Clara, his assistant, who had connections that might help. Clara, he said over the phone, I need you to dig into a man named Vincent Rossi. I want everything: business ties, criminal records, weaknesses. Clara hesitated. Ethan, this sounds dangerous. Are you sure about this? I don't have a choice, Ethan replied. Please, just find what you can. As Ethan ended the call, Emily spoke up. You really think digging up dirt on him will stop him? He doesn't play by the rules, Ethan. Neither do I, Ethan said, his eyes dark with determination. The next morning, Clara sent over a file containing everything she could find on Vincent. Ethan and Emily pored over the details, searching for a way to use Vincent's own power against him. This, Ethan said, pointing to a document. He's laundering money through shell companies. If we expose this, he'll have bigger problems than chasing you. Emily frowned. You think he'll just back off if his operation gets exposed? No, Ethan admitted. But if we can tip off the right people, law enforcement, rivals, it might force him into hiding. It's risky, but it's better than waiting for him to come after us. Emily hesitated, then nodded. If it means keeping the kids safe, I'll do it. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. We'll get through this. Together. The weight of the plan pressed heavily on Ethan and Emily as they worked late into the night. Clara's information had given them a roadmap, but every move carried risk. If they failed, Vincent wouldn't just retaliate, he'd destroy them. Ethan spread the documents across the kitchen table, the tension etched on his face. This shell company, he said, pointing to a printout, is the key. If we can expose the laundering operation, it'll trigger a federal investigation. Vincent won't be able to operate openly. Emily crossed her arms, her brow furrowed. And what happens if he finds out we're behind it? He won't just disappear, Ethan. He'll come after us. We'll stay ahead of him, Ethan said firmly. We don't have another choice. Emily leaned against the counter, the exhaustion evident in her posture. This isn't just about me anymore. If we push him too far, Felix and Sophie could get caught in the crossfire. Ethan stepped closer, his voice softening. That's why we're doing this. To protect them. I know I let you down before, but I won't let it happen again. Emily held his gaze, searching for any sign of insincerity. For the first time, she saw a flicker of the man she had once trusted. With a reluctant nod, she straightened. Fine. But we need a backup plan in case this blows up. The next day, Ethan and Emily moved carefully, each step calculated. Clara worked behind the scenes, quietly leaking information to a federal contact she trusted. Meanwhile, Ethan and Emily focused on laying the groundwork for their next move, delivering a fake message to Vincent that would buy them more time. They chose a public location for the exchange, a bustling coffee shop near the center of Charleston. The noise and crowd provided a cover, but the tension in the air was palpable. Emily sat at a corner table, her eyes scanning the room. She wore a scarf to partially obscure her face, her nerves on edge. Ethan approached, carrying 2 coffees, and slid into the seat across from her. "He'll send someone to pick up the message," Ethan said, keeping his voice low. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, her grip tightening on the table's edge. "It's the only way," Ethan replied. "If we make him think we're cooperating, he'll let his guard down long enough for Clara's contact to move in." Emily nodded, though her stomach churned. Minutes later, a man in a leather jacket entered the shop, his gaze sweeping over the tables before locking onto Ethan and Emily. He walked over, his movements deliberate, and sat down without invitation. "You have something for Vincent?" the man asked, his voice sharp. Ethan slid a plain envelope across the table. "Tell him this is everything he needs, and tell him he'll get the rest when we meet in person." The man snorted. "You think you're in charge here?" Ethan met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "Just deliver the message." The man glared at him, but grabbed the envelope and left without another word. As they exited the coffee shop, Emily's breath came out in short bursts. "What if he doesn't believe us?" she asked, her voice shaky. "He will," Ethan said confidently, though his own nerves were fraying. Now we wait for Clara's contact to pull the trigger. Later that evening, Ethan and Emily received a call from Clara. Her voice was tense, but steady. The tip worked. Federal agents are already mobilizing to investigate Vincent's shell companies. But there's a complication. "What kind of complication?" Ethan asked, dread creeping into his chest. "Vincent has informants everywhere," Clara said. "He knows someone leaked the information, and he's narrowing down who it could be." Emily's face paled. "What does that mean for us?" "It means you need to disappear fast," Clara replied. "Vincent's people are already asking questions around Charleston. If he connects this to you, he won't wait for the feds to take him down." Ethan clenched his fists, his mind racing. "We're not running again," he said. "We finish this." Clara hesitated. "Just be careful, Ethan. This isn't a corporate negotiation. Vincent doesn't play by the rules." That night, as the city quieted, Ethan and Emily sat in her living room, the weight of the day pressing down on them. The children slept soundly in the next room, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing outside. "Do you think this will work?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "It has to. We've come too far to back down now." Emily studied him, her emotions a mixture of fear, anger, and something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "If this doesn't work," she said softly, "promise me one thing." "Anything," Ethan said. "Promise me you'll protect them," she said, her voice breaking. "Even if it means letting me go." Ethan's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I promise." The next morning, Emily stood by the window, the first rays of sunlight creeping over the Charleston skyline. The city seemed peaceful, but her mind was anything but. Somewhere out there, Vincent was tightening his grip, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their time was running out. Ethan was already awake, seated at the kitchen table, with his laptop open. Clara had sent another update during the night. "The feds are moving in today," Ethan said, glancing up. "If they can secure enough evidence from Vincent's operations, he won't have time to come after us." Emily crossed her arms, her expression doubtful. "And if he does? What's the backup plan?" Ethan sighed. "We stick to the plan, Emily. If he makes a move, we've got enough leverage to expose him further. He can't go after us and protect his empire at the same time." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but a knock at the door cut her off. Both of them froze. "Were you expecting anyone?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Emily shook her head. Slowly, she moved toward the door, peering through the peephole. A delivery man stood outside, holding a package. "It's just a courier," she whispered, relaxing slightly. She opened the door cautiously, signing for the package, and closing the door behind her. Ethan frowned as she set the box on the table. Who would send you something now? Emily hesitated. I don't know. They opened the box together. Inside was a single object, a burner phone. Its screen lit up as soon as Ethan picked it up, displaying an incoming call. Emily's stomach dropped. Don't answer it, she whispered. Ethan hesitated but pressed the answer button, putting the phone on speaker. Good morning, Vincent's voice drawled from the other end. The sound sent a shiver down Emily's spine. What do you want? Ethan asked, his tone sharp. Vincent chuckled darkly. I wanted to thank you for the little gift you left me at the coffee shop. Very creative. But you underestimated me, Mr. Calloway. I always know who my enemies are. Emily felt her heart race. What does that mean? She asked, stepping closer to the phone. It means, Vincent continued, his tone icy, you've made this personal. And when things get personal, I don't just go after the target. I go after everyone around them. The line went dead. Ethan slammed the phone down, his jaw tight. He's making a move. Emily felt her knees weaken, but she steadied herself against the table. What do we do? Ethan grabbed his coat. We need to get to the kids. If he's serious, he'll try to use them against us. Emily didn't need further convincing. They rushed to the bedroom where Felix and Sophie were still asleep. Emily gently shook them awake, her voice calm despite the fear coursing through her veins. Mom, what's going on? Sophie asked groggily, sitting up. We're going on a little trip, Emily said, forcing a smile. Get dressed quickly, okay? The children obeyed, their movements sluggish but compliant. Minutes later, the family was in Ethan's car, driving through the quiet streets. Emily kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her paranoia growing with every turn. We can't just drive aimlessly, she said, her voice strained. He'll find us. I'm not driving aimlessly, Ethan replied. We're going to Clara's contact, the federal agent she trusts. Emily's brow furrowed. You think they'll protect us? They don't have a choice, Ethan said firmly. They arrived at a small office building tucked between two larger structures. The sign on the door read Riverside Accounting. But Ethan assured Emily it was just a front. Inside, they were met by Agent Mark Reynolds, a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Clara had warned him they were coming. You are the Calloways? Reynolds asked, shaking Ethan's hand. Ethan nodded. We need protection. Vincent Rossi's made it clear he's coming after us. Reynolds gestured for them to sit. We've been building a case against Rossi for years. Your information could be the tipping point, but it also makes you a target. We'll secure you and your family, but you'll need to cooperate fully. Emily looked at Ethan, her voice firm. Do whatever you have to do. Just keep my kids safe. Reynolds assigned a team to watch the office and placed the family in a secure room while the federal operation unfolded. Emily sat on the edge of the couch, holding Felix close while Sophie doodled in a notebook to keep calm. Ethan stood by the window, watching the agents move with precision. Do you think this will be enough? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't turn around. It has to be, he said. The federal office buzzed with quiet tension as Agent Reynolds coordinated his team. Surveillance footage streamed on multiple monitors, agents whispered into radios, and the hum of anticipation filled the air. Ethan stood at the edge of the room, his arms crossed tightly as he watched the activity unfold. Emily sat on a small couch with Felix and Sophie, doing her best to keep their spirits up. It's like an adventure, okay? She said softly, brushing Felix's curls from his forehead. Sophie clutched her notebook, her pencil hovering above the page as she sketched quietly. Ethan finally turned to Reynolds. What's the plan? You've got everything you need to take him down, right? Reynolds leaned against the table, his expression serious. We've intercepted enough data from his shell companies to build a strong case. But Rossi's slippery. If he suspects we're closing in, he could bolt or worse escalate. Emily's voice cut through the conversation. He already called us. He knows we're involved. What happens if he decides to retaliate before you make your move? Reynolds straightened. That's why we're keeping you here. Rossi won't risk coming at you directly while we have a team on site. Emily exchanged a worried glance with Ethan. And if he does? Reynolds didn't answer immediately, and that silence spoke louder than words. Outside, an unmarked sedan sat idling across the street. Inside, one of Rossi's men surveyed the building through binoculars. He spoke into a small earpiece, his voice low. They're here. The family and the feds. What's the call? A pause. Then Vincent's icy voice crackled over the line. Wait for my signal. We're not finished yet. Back inside, Ethan's phone buzzed. He frowned, pulling it from his pocket. The number was blocked. Don't answer it, Emily said quickly, her voice sharp. Ethan hesitated but answered anyway, putting it on speaker. What do you want, Rossi? Vincent's voice oozed over the line. Mr. Calloway. How's the safe house? Cozy, I hope. Emily stiffened, her grip tightening on Felix's shoulder. You think you're untouchable because the feds are babysitting you? Vincent continued. Let me remind you I don't play fair. Ethan's jaw clenched. If you come after my family, I swear, Vincent cut him off with a dark laugh. Swear what? You're out of your depth, Calloway. But I'll give you one last chance. Bring me what I want. No more games. The line went dead. Ethan slammed the phone down, his frustration boiling over. How does he always know where we are? Reynolds frowned, motioning to an agent. Check for leaks. He could have someone on the inside, or he's using surveillance we haven't detected. As the agents scrambled to assess the situation, Sophie tugged on Emily's sleeve. Mom, she said hesitantly. Emily crouched beside her. What is it, sweetheart? Sophie pointed to the window. There's been a car outside for a long time. I saw it earlier too. Ethan immediately turned toward the window, his heart racing. Where? Sophie pointed again, her small finger trembling. Over there across the street. Reynolds joined them, grabbing a pair of binoculars. When he looked, his face darkened. That's one of Rossi's guys, he muttered. Why haven't they moved on us yet? Emily asked, her voice laced with fear. Because they're waiting for the right moment, Reynolds replied grimly. The room erupted into motion as Reynolds gave orders. I want a team out there now. Don't let them slip away. Ethan pulled Emily aside, his expression urgent. If this place isn't safe, we need to get the kids out of here. Emily's eyes widened. And? Go where? He'll find us, Ethan. He always does. Not if we split up, Ethan said, lowering his voice. I'll lead him away, give you time to disappear with the kids. Emily shook her head, her voice breaking. You can't do that. He'll kill you. I'm not letting him hurt you or them, Ethan said, his tone firm. This is the only way. Before Emily could argue further, Reynolds interrupted. If you're splitting up, we'll need to coordinate. Rossi's men won't stop at one move. The agents escorted the family to a secured parking garage beneath the building. Reynolds handed Ethan a burner phone. Stay in contact. We'll give you updates as we move on Rossi's crew. Ethan nodded, glancing at Emily. You take the kids to the backup safe house Clara arranged. I'll draw Rossi's attention. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to stay strong. You'd better come back, Ethan. He managed a faint smile. I will. Just keep them safe. Ethan drove off in one direction while Emily and the kids were loaded into another vehicle with two agents. As the cars split, the tension inside Emily's vehicle was suffocating. She clutched Felix's hand tightly, her thoughts racing. Where's Dad going? Felix asked softly. Emily forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. He's just making sure we're safe, honey. Felix nodded, but Sophie watched her mother carefully, her sharp gaze filled with worry. Meanwhile, Ethan sped through the city streets, keeping a watchful eye on his mirrors. It didn't take long for him to spot the dark sedan tailing him. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, weaving through traffic. He needed to lead them far enough away to give Emily and the kids a real chance. As the sedan gained on him, Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. The trap was set, but who was truly in control? The roar of engines filled the air as Ethan's car weaved through the crowded Charleston streets. The dark sedan stayed close behind, its driver relentless. Ethan glanced at the rearview mirror, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he calculated his next move. "This has to work," he muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He turned sharply down a narrow alley, his tires screeching against the pavement. The sedan followed, its headlights bouncing erratically as it struggled to keep pace. Ethan's mind raced. He needed to buy more time for Emily and the kids to reach safety. Meanwhile, Emily's car sped toward the safe house, flanked by federal agents in an unmarked SUV. The children sat silently in the back, their small faces pale with fear. Emily kept her eyes on the road, fighting the rising panic in her chest. "Almost there," she murmured to herself, as much to calm her nerves as to reassure the kids. Sophie finally broke the silence. "Mom, is Dad going to be okay?" Emily hesitated, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He'll be fine," she said, though her voice wavered. "Your dad's stronger than you think." Felix looked up, his eyes wide. "What if the bad guys catch him?" "They won't," Emily said quickly, though her heart clenched at the thought. Back in the city, Ethan made another sharp turn, emerging onto a deserted stretch of industrial road. The sedan was still behind him, its driver pressing harder now. "Come on," Ethan muttered, spotting his destination up ahead, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the river. He'd chosen the location deliberately, knowing the labyrinth of loading docks and storage containers would give him a chance to turn the tables. Ethan hit the gas, skidding to a stop just inside the warehouse. He jumped out, ducking behind a stack of pallets as the sedan screeched to a halt nearby. Two men climbed out of the car, their faces hard and determined. One of them called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "We know you're in here, Calloway. Make this easy on yourself." Ethan stayed silent, his pulse pounding in his ears. He reached for the metal pipe he'd grabbed from his car earlier, gripping it tightly. The men split up, their footsteps crunching against the concrete floor. Ethan waited, his breath steady despite the chaos around him. When one of them passed too close, Ethan struck, swinging the pipe hard against the man's knee. The thug let out a cry of pain, collapsing to the ground. Ethan didn't hesitate, grabbing his fallen weapon, a small handgun, and turning toward the second man. "Drop it," Ethan said, his voice low and controlled. The man froze, his hands slowly rising. "Tell Rossi he's made a mistake," Ethan growled. "You come after my family again, and I'll make sure it's the last thing you do." The thug's lips curled into a defiant smirk. "You think this end with us?" he spat. "Rossi's already 3 steps ahead." Ethan's stomach churned, but he didn't let his resolve waver. "We'll see about that," he said, stepping back toward his car while keeping the gun trained on the man. Once inside, Ethan sped off, leaving the injured thug and his partner behind. But the man's words haunted him. At the safe house, Emily and the kids arrived safely. The federal agents swept the perimeter, ensuring the building was secure. Inside now, one of the agents barked, motioning for Emily to move quickly. Emily ushered Felix and Sophie through the door, her heart pounding as she scanned the street one last time. As they settled into the safe house, Sophie tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, when's Dad coming?" Emily knelt in front of her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Soon, sweetheart," she said. "He just needs to take care of something first." Sophie nodded, though her eyes were filled with doubt. Hours passed, and tension hung thick in the air. Emily paced the small living room, her thoughts racing. She glanced at the burner phone Ethan had given her before they split up. It hadn't rung once. Finally, The silence was broken by the sound of a car pulling up outside. Emily rushed to the window, her heart leaping when she saw Ethan step out. She flung the door open, relief washing over her as he approached. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, though his face was pale and drawn. "I bought us some time," he said. "But Rossi knows we're not backing down. He'll come at us harder now." Emily's stomach dropped. "So what do we do?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "We take the fight to him. End this on our terms." The safe house was quiet, the stillness broken only by the occasional hum of the security system. Ethan stood at the kitchen table, a map spread before him. Emily leaned against the wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression filled with both worry and determination. "We can't keep running," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "Rossi will keep coming, and next time he won't just send his men. He'll come himself." Emily glanced toward the room where Felix and Sophie slept, their soft breathing the only reminder of what was truly at stake. "So what's the plan?" she asked, her voice edged with resolve. "We use the leverage we have," Ethan replied, pointing to the map. "Rossi's operations are built on secrecy. Clara confirmed that the feds are closing in, but we need to force his hand. We leak his location, make him too exposed to operate." Emily frowned. "And then what?" "He'll know it's us." "That's the point," Ethan said. "We draw him out. If he's focused on us, it gives the feds the opening they need to take him down." Emily's chest tightened. "You're talking about using us as bait." "I'm talking about ending this," Ethan countered. "Once and for all." The next morning, Ethan made the call. Clara patched him through to Agent Reynolds, who listened intently as Ethan outlined the plan. "You're sure about this?" Reynolds asked, his tone skeptical. "Rossi's unpredictable. If you corner him, he might lash out." "That's a risk we're willing to take," Ethan replied. Reynolds sighed. "Fine. We'll have teams in place, but if this goes south, you're on your own until we can regroup." Ethan hung up and turned to Emily. "It's time." They chose an abandoned marina on the outskirts of Charleston for the confrontation. The location offered plenty of open space and places for the feds to set up covert surveillance. Ethan and Emily arrived early, their nerves stretched taut as they waited. Ethan checked his watch, then glanced at Emily. "You don't have to do this." Emily shook her head. "This isn't just your fight, Ethan. I'm not running anymore." He nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Then let's finish it." An hour later, headlights pierced the darkness as multiple cars pulled into the marina. Ethan and Emily stood near one of the docks, their silhouettes outlined against the faint glow of the water. Vincent stepped out of the lead car, flanked by 3 of his men. His expression was cold, but a twisted smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Calloway," he said, his voice echoing in the night. "You've been busy." "You wanted us," Ethan replied, stepping forward. "Here we are." Vincent chuckled, shaking his head. "I have to admit I didn't expect you to be this bold. But boldness won't save you." "Maybe not," Ethan said, holding up a flash drive. "But this might." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Every transaction, every shell company, every dirty deal you've ever made," Ethan said. "It's all here. And right now it's being streamed to the feds." Vincent's smile vanished, replaced by a murderous glare. "You think you can outplay me?" "I don't need to outplay you," Ethan said. "I just need to end you." The standoff was interrupted by the sound of tires screeching in the distance. Federal SUVs roared into the marina, agents pouring out with weapons drawn. "Vincent Rossi," Agent Reynolds shouted, his voice amplified by a loudspeaker. "You're surrounded. Drop your weapons and surrender." Vincent's men hesitated, glancing nervously at one another. But Vincent remained calm, his smirk returning as he slowly raised his hands. "Well played, Calloway," he said. "But this isn't over." As the agents moved in to arrest him, Vincent's men made a last-ditch attempt to fight back. Shots rang out, chaos erupting as the marina became a battleground. Ethan grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her behind cover as bullets whizzed past. "Stay down," he shouted. Emily's heart pounded as she clutched a discarded plank of wood, prepared to fight if necessary. But within minutes, the gunfire ceased, the feds quickly overpowering Ross's crew. Reynolds approached Ethan and Emily, his expression grim but relieved. "It's over," he said. "We've got him." Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. Back at the safe house, the family reunited. Felix and Sophie ran to their parents, clinging to them tightly as tears filled their eyes. "Are we safe now?" Felix asked, his voice small. Emily knelt beside him, her hands on his shoulders. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're safe." Later, as the children slept, Ethan and Emily sat together on the couch, the exhaustion catching up to them. "You did it," Emily said softly. "You really did it." Ethan shook his head. "We did it," he corrected. For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to hope for a future free from fear, and maybe, just maybe, for a chance to rebuild what they had lost. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey of resilience, redemption, and second chances. If you enjoyed this story and want more gripping tales filled with suspense, emotion, and unexpected twists, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We have plenty more stories to keep you on the edge of your seat. See you in the next adventure.